yesterday, a federal judge, Cameron Curry, dismissed the Trump retribution cases against New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. Now, when these indictments were brought up a couple of months ago, they were immediately panned by legal experts who called the cases very weak. They said the evidence was thin, and they said that was evidenced by the fact that, co-attorney signatures weren't even on any of these indictments. They were only signed by acting U.S. Attorney Lindsey Halligan, who had been personally appointed by Donald Trump to gin up these cases to go after Letitia James and James Comey because he doesn't like them. And so people thought there were a lot of different ways that these cases probably could have gotten dismissed because there were so many holes in them. But interestingly, Judge Cameron Curry basically said that none of these cases were ever legitimate to begin with because Lindsey Halligan wasn't actually a legally appointed U.S. attorney. And that because of that foundational fact that none of the actions she has taken over the past couple of months were actually real, actually legal, or actually legitimate. And so every single thing stemming from her illegitimate appointment doesn't matter. It makes all of those other things moot. And so that is the initial reason why these cases got thrown out today, among, kind of all of the other weaknesses people thought that might lead to them getting thrown out down the road. Those don't seem to matter anymore because of Halligan's illegitimate appointment. So this situation yesterday sent the White House into meltdown mode, of course. So Caroline Leavitt had to get out there and do some damage control. And she went and did a Fox News interview where they asked her about the legitimacy of these dismissals. And this is what she had to say about it. Let's take a look.
That and what can we expect will happen next, Caroline?
Well, what I will say is that everybody knows that James Comey lied to Congress. It's as clear as day. And this judge took an unprecedented action to throw these cases out to shield James Comey and Letitia James from accountability based on a technical ruling. And the administration disagrees with that technical ruling. We believe the attorney in this case, Lindsey Halligan, is not only extremely qualified for this position, but she was, in fact, legally appointed. And I know the Department of Justice will be appealing this in very short order. So maybe James Comey should pump the brakes on his victory lap.
All right, we'll be watching. We just showed a small piece of it. It goes on and on. Caroline, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Happy
Martha.
Thanksgiving. Good to see you.
Too.
There is a lot to respond to from that clip. First of all, Leavitt's claim that Lindsey Halligan is well qualified for this role is ridiculous. First of all, Halligan has no prosecutorial experience whatsoever. She's never prosecuted a case in a courtroom. She's never dealt with a grand jury before. She has absolutely no qualification to be in this role other than the fact that she is a Trump lackey and Trump was looking for a rubber stamp who was going to sign off on indictments against his political enemies without thinking twice about it. That is why she was appointed to this role. Hell, her predecessor who was in this role beforehand, the previous interim U.S. attorney for Eastern Virginia, resigned his position because he wouldn't sign these sham indictments. And that is how Halligan ended up in this role in the first place. So the idea that she's somehow highly qualified and that's why she's there is ridiculous. And that is evidenced no better by the fact than the fact that last week when she was doing another hearing in front of a judge about this case, she admitted that she had never actually gotten sign off from the full grand jury on the indictment before she signed it and passed it down to a judge. That is legal malpractice at its finest. And so she has no idea what she's doing. She doesn't understand the law. She doesn't understand the procedures, and she doesn't understand how to operate in a courtroom. So that is, let's put that aside first of all. Next, this idea that her appointment was legal is also ridiculous. It was not a legal appointment. The whole point of this is that interim attorneys or interim appointments for anything, as designated by Article 2 of the Constitution, is that there are 120-day periods where people can be acting in a certain role before they need to be approved by the Senate in order to have their authority. Otherwise, it would just be the president being able to appoint whoever he wants every 120 days to secure sham indictments on stuff like this. Like, we're seeing the exact reason why those parts of the Constitution are set up. So presidential appointments for these positions have to have Senate confirmation. And Trump just thought, well, I don't have to do that. I'll just reappoint her acting U.S. attorney, and I can just keep doing that over and over again. The judge says, absolutely not. That is what the Constitution clearly says, that cannot happen, and that you can't just reappoint a new person every 120 days because that's what you feel like. It makes those appointees and their actions illegal. And so there was no legal appointment here. And when they appeal this case, it's going to get laughed out of the room, because that is a strong argument that will stand up against a judge. They're going to say, no, the core part of bestowing authority into these positions is having Senate confirmation. They need to pass that test. Otherwise, the role isn't real. The role isn't legitimate, and their power isn't legitimate. Now, the other part of this that I think is so interesting is the fact that because the case was so weak, no other attorneys or U.S. attorneys would sign on to this indictment. So this has happened a couple of times during the Trump administration at this point, where they've had certain U.S. attorneys rendered illegitimate for this exact reason, which is the fact that Trump appointed them without getting Senate confirmation. But for some of those indictments that those U.S. attorneys have handed down, there have been other attorney signatures on it. So even if their signature gets taken off, there are other attorneys that can kind of keep the case moving forward. Because these Comey James cases were so weak, Lindsey Halligan is the only one who was willing to sign them in the first place. So with her signature taken off, the entire case has fallen apart, and they cannot continue. Now, I want to play James Comey's response to the news that this case has been dropped. And I'll be honest, am I a huge fan of James Comey? No, but he makes some good points here. So let's take a look at what he has to say.
I'm grateful that the court ended the case against me, which was a prosecution based on malevolence and incompetence, and a reflection of what the Department of Justice has become under Donald Trump, which is heartbreaking. But I was also inspired by the example of the career people who refused to be part of this travesty. It cost some of them their jobs, which is painful, but it preserved their integrity, which is beyond price. And I know they will serve again. I was very lucky that some of the best lawyers in America stepped forward to represent me. I hope they serve as an example to more and more lawyers, especially some of the big firms, to participate in protecting our liberty, protecting the rule of law.
And that end point is from Comey's response is what I want to focus on, because it is true. This call for people in the legal profession, whether it is people, working in the judicial branch, or people who are judges in the courts, or this call he makes to corporate law, which bent the knee to Trump earlier this year and agreed to basically do the Trump administration's illegal bidding, because they didn't want to have any of their federal grants or federal contracts cut off. And so they bent the knee to Trump. And it was disappointing to people who feel like the legal system is the only guardrail keeping things up right now and actually holding this administration accountable and saying, you can't do these things. They are not following the letter of the law. And so I think Comey's call to action here for the legal community is a good one, and it is one that they should heed. There are these questions about what happens after this now, because the judge dismissed these cases without prejudice, meaning that Comey and James basically go back to the status they were beforehand as unindicted people, but they would be allowed to technically be indicted again for these cases. Now, on the Comey side of things, the statute of limitations has run out on this. That was why this indictment was rushed in the first place, was they were trying to do it before the statute of limitations ended on it. So the statute of limitations has run out. So when this appeal inevitably gets torn up and the Trump administration lawyers get laughed out of the courtroom, the statute of limitations for Comey will be over. We'll see what happens with Letitia James, but it looks like the administration will just run into another issue where the case is so thin and so absurd, and Lindsey Halligan is clearly obviously not legitimate at this point, that I think they're going to have a hard time finding anybody who's actually willing to go down this road again, when it could clearly end for a number of reasons, because the administration isn't able to put together a strong case against either of these people. Now, what has been interesting, of course, too, in this day yesterday where all of this was going on, was the Fox News propaganda response to all of it, and how they tried to reassure their viewers that, you know, retribution might still be around the corner, and that this was just kind of a little road bump in Trump's illegal attempts to go after his and persecute his political enemies. Let's take a look at what the Fox spin of all of this was
when it comes to that issue.
Right. Do we foresee at all then an appeal or a different than prosecution, a second bite of the apple then with procedural things intact?
I would just, I mean, yes, it's a 29-page opinion. I was just reading through it. So sorry if I look distracted during our segment. It doesn't get to the claim of malicious prosecution that Jim Comey was making. So this is solely the appointments clause, and that's why you have both cases dismissed against both individuals.
Right.
And it is kind of interesting, though, because obviously that's kind of a fluke side ruling, not on the merits of the case. But it is kind of interesting how all of these fluke side rulings always tend to seem to go in the same direction.
Yeah.
Now, I love this idea that because this case didn't go to trial and fall apart there, that this whole thing is a fluke. And, you know, this has nothing to do with the fact that about, you know, with the actual basis of the case. And that is ridiculous. This isn't a fluke. For months, people have been warning the administration, and we've been seeing in the courts that these appointments of these U.S. attorneys that Trump is using to go after his enemies were not legal. So this wasn't some little technicality. This is something that the administration was warned was not going to work out in their favor, and it hasn't. And so, you know, I think this ruling proves that the administration broke the law, and not that Comey and James were shielded by activist judges. It's just ridiculous. And at the end of the day, this feels like a glimmer of hope, and it feels like the retribution agenda is falling apart under its own competence, but in some ways under the strength of the legal system as well. I mean, at least things are dispersed enough within the judicial branch that these checks on Trump's blatantly illegal attempt to go after his political enemies are holding up. And so it does feel like, as long as the White House keeps trying to break the law, that these cases are going to keep falling apart, because this isn't an incompetent administration, and only people who are incompetent will sign on to do some of this ludicrous bidding of the president. And so it feels like a good moment. It feels like we should celebrate the upside of what happened yesterday. And, you know, I think as much as MAGA wants to claim that they are the party of the rule of law and law and order, we continue to see how absurd that claim is every single day. That is it for me today. If you liked what you saw, throw a like on this video, follow the Demwins Media YouTube channel, follow me at buildingthebench.substack.com, and we will keep bringing you the news as you need to see it. Thanks for watching.